Welcome back. Today's video is a little different. Hopefully you can notice that the audio quality is much better. Someone very kindly left me a message about my poor audio quality. So today I'm joining you with some mics, my really beautiful vintage mug, a couple of books that I want to talk about from 2024. These are books that I read last year that either for whatever reason I just didn't talk too much about. They are books that I also equally loved, some books that were disappointments, my favorite author. It's a couple different questions for this end of the year book tag, and I thought it would be a great way to talk about some books that I didn't get to talk too much about last year. Also, I am still a bit sick, if you can hear it in my voice. I'm feeling much better today, and I wanted to go ahead and get this video out. So let's go ahead and go over my end of the year book tag. I will have all of these questions listed in the description if you would like to do this video as well. What other disclaimers do I need to give? I think that's it, so let's go ahead and get into it. Question number one, we're starting off with the most disappointing books of the year. Two automatically come to mind. One of them was technically my fault, but we'll get into that. I'm going to start with the book that I don't have a physical copy of. That is The Guest by Emma Cline. Over the summer, this was all over all of my social pages. In the literary fiction space, so many of my mutuals were reading this book, loving it, constantly raving about it. So I got it from my local library, and I really did not enjoy it. Normally, if I'm starting a book and I don't like it, I immediately will just put it down. I am all for hard or soft DNFing a book. I just kept thinking, okay, maybe after they resolve this issue, it'll get better. But unfortunately, it never did. It wasn't necessarily the writing, but I think just the main character we were following was so insufferable to me. Also, throughout the plot, things were very conveniently happening. She had these issues with her phone. Right in that one moment that she needed to send a text message, she was able to, and then all of a sudden water damage, so she didn't have it for a week. I just didn't really care for it. I didn't like the ending. All in all, it was just unfortunately not a book for me. The other book that I say is my fault is a book that I was really excited about because I adore this author. I've read A Diary of Blood. T. Gibson is just really special for me. So I was so excited when I heard An Education in Malice. For the people that love vampires, dark, more gothic kind of style books. If you love Nosferatu, who are my people. So I was really excited about this. This is a Carmilla and Laura retelling. Everything was lining up to tell me that I would really like this. The one issue is that this is a contemporary story, whereas A Diary of Blood was set during the Victorian times. I still thought that I would enjoy it because Carmilla and Laura in this version, at the university that they attend, they have this really private poetry seminar. It's one of those invite-onlys, and they're writing these beautiful poems, and they read these beautiful poems throughout the book. So I did enjoy that aspect of it, but because it was in a contemporary setting, it just continued to take me out of the story time and time again. After I got about the halfway mark, I felt like it started to drag. We could have wrapped the story up much quicker. And honestly, I don't even remember how this book ends at this point. But if you don't mind a contemporary story and you love vampire books just like I do, you might be the target audience for this. Question two is the Underdog book of the year. That hands down is Little Rabbit. This is a book that I also added in my top 10 list if you saw that video. This is a book that I don't hear many people talk about. Check the content warnings about this. Concept, the writing, how sensual and beautiful it is. It would just ended up being such a sweet surprise. I really love this book, and I really hope that more people get to read it this year. And if you've read a book that's similar, please comment down below and let me know, because I'm trying to find more books like this and I just haven't yet. Question three is a book you loved in the moment but you don't think about now. I have two for this question as well. The first one is Writers and Lovers by Lily King. This is a book that I read on my Kindle. I quickly made my way through it. This is another staple, it feels like, in the literary fiction space, a book that a lot of my mutuals have read, and I felt like required reading that I hadn't done yet. I remember in the moment vividly enjoying it and having a really good time with it. The timeline of our main character took a different shift than what I was expecting, but all in all, I really did enjoy it. But the story just didn't linger after that. I didn't find myself thinking about it. I didn't feel compelled to go through and look at all of my highlights on my Kindle. It was just a good book in the moment, and that's it. I can't really remember too much about it now. And the other book that this happened with with. I was so shocked, but it actually is Blue Sisters by Coco Mellers. This is the ARC that I received. I was screaming and running around my house when I saw that I was sent the ARC. I was so excited to read this. I wasn't too crazy about Cleopatra and Frankenstein. I enjoyed it, but I feel like I've read other age gap romances that I prefer much more. When I read the synopsis for Blue Sisters, I was so thoroughly excited. I love books about siblings. This book in particular, we follow the grief that the three sisters are feeling after they lose one of their sisters. Because this is a sibling book, we follow Avery, Bonnie, Nikki, and Lucky. Nikki ends up passing away. The three other sisters end up making their way back to one another, talking and processing through this grief and figuring out what their next steps are going to be. So the synopsis just sounded right up my alley. I felt like, okay, I didn't really like Leo and Frank, but I will for sure love this. This was a book that I took my time reading. There were some sisters that I preferred their perspective over the other, and every chapter does change. And although I enjoyed my reading experience, there was nothing that impacted me, nothing that lingered. I don't feel inclined to pick the book back up, go through my annotations like I mentioned in the other one. It was just a book that I liked in the moment, and that was about it. Question 4, we have my favorite book couple of the year. I don't read books with really healthy relationships in them. I'm looking at my card of books right now. There is no couple that I can see or that I can think of that I read this year. I only read one fluffy-ish romance book this year, and then the other books were just unhealthy and a bit toxic. The only time I'm okay with a toxic relationship is if it's in my book. So this one was a bit tricky to answer, but technically kind of cheating, kind of not. I am halfway through the book, and in Little Women, I guess I would go with Amy and Lori. Initially, in my heart, it was always Joe and Lori, but I have accepted. If I had to pick one out of the ones that I've read, it would be Amy and Lori from Little Women. Question 5 is a book that you can't stop recommending. I decided to base this off of the book that I genuinely have recommended the most to people in my personal life, friends, family, coworkers, and it just so happened to be my favorite book of the year. So if you watch my 10 best books, you know that that is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, translated by Ross Schwartz. This is a really impactful book for me. I feel like a lot of people would really enjoy it regardless of what genre you typically usually read from. The select few people that I recommended this to that have read it, they have really liked it. So easily it is this book. Moving on to question 6, which is a book that surprised you. I think the book that surprised me the most is this one. This is The End of Loneliness by Benedict Wells. I'd never heard or read anything from the author. I genuinely think I just saw the cover. And I think by this point, as a reader, you know that if you see a cover that's black and white with a white font for the title, you know you're going to be in for an emotionally heavy book. Example, A Little Light, Shuggy Bane. Haven't finished either of them, but from the reviews, I know that they are very emotionally heavy. And that is what ended up happening with this book. We follow 3 siblings. They are also processing this grief. And the really interesting thing about this book is something happened to the siblings when they were quite young. They lose their parents. They're put up in the foster care system. And then all 3 siblings are split. They're split up for a very long time. And then as adults, they slowly come back together. They process what happened. They talk about things. And as the cover leaves you to believe, this was emotionally very heavy, really devastating, with such beautiful writing. And I really did not know what to expect from the book because I hadn't seen too many reviews of it, but I was so thoroughly and pleasantly surprised with this. I would definitely pick another book up from this author. And I think this is the only, or one of the only male authors that I've read from this year. I don't read too many, but this one was a very pleasant surprise, and I would recommend. Question 7, we have a new favorite author. Easily, that is Lisa Taddeo. I started 2024 off, not technically started, but I did read Animal in January. This is the debut for her fiction. And from here, I was immediately hooked with Lisa Taddeo. Her writing, after I've read this, I consumed so many of her interviews and just fully dissected this book. It was such a beautiful way to start the year. There's just something so captivating with Lisa Taddeo's writing, and it resonated so much with me, so much so that I decided to read her nonfiction, which I'm not typically a nonfiction reader. It's harder for me to stay engaged and want to naturally pick pick up a nonfiction book. When I read 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo for book club, this easily read like fiction. After reading this, it just solidified Lisa Taddeo as an author for me. The amount of time and attention and care she took to answer this question about desire, how it's such a drive for so many of us and it impacts all of us in such a different way. Even though this is nonfiction, I was equally as hooked when I was reading this as when I was reading this. So of course, I had to pick up her short story collection. This is called Ghost Lover. Started it in 2024, was not able to finish it, so I will be finishing it this new year. It's safe to say that whatever Lisa Taddeo publishes next, I will be buying and reading and most likely loving. Highly, highly recommend Lisa Taddeo. Question 8, we have my happiest read of the year. Now, again, I read a lot of sad, heavy books focusing a lot about existential dread, feeling very melancholy, sometimes very bleak endings. So the happiest book that I read, I only have one, I think, and that one for sure is Funny Story by Emily Henry. Emily Henry is that author for me that, although I don't read too many romance books, if I'm in the mood for one, it's going to be an Emily Henry. Every year when she publishes her new book, I always make the effort of going to the bookstore, typically reading it and finishing it that same day or the following day. I just love her romances. Her stories just feel so well balanced, having characters that feel fully fleshed out, but still mixing in those romance elements so that it feels like a whole book, at least for my personal preference when it comes to reading. Her characters ground the story so much more, making me believe genuinely in the romance. Her banter is just some of my favorite that I've ever read, and while I'm reading it, it's making me genuinely smile and feel really giddy, and it makes me feel quite silly when I read her books in public, but Emily Henry is just that author for me, so that is definitely the happiest book that I read this year. Question 9, we have the most frustrating books that I read. 2 immediately come to mind. One of them, even though it was really frustrating, worked out in my favor and I still enjoyed it. The other one was frustrating and it did not work in my favor and I did not enjoy it. The one that I did ultimately enjoy, even through the frustration, is What It's Like in Words. This is for the people that like Sally Rooney, Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan, a beautiful literary fiction of this woman who starts a relationship up with this guy who is just not good for her, really unhealthy, but she wears those rose-colored glasses and she does not want to take those poor glasses off. It was frustrating in that sense because she continued to treat herself and her friends less than and continued to put this man on a pedestal. And as the reader, we see the bigger picture and we can just see that the train is going to crash, but you look at the train crash because you can't help it. And I continued to read it hoping that I would get to the point where she connected the dots and realized and took the glasses off, and I wanted to see what kind of decision she would make. So that is why this book was frustrating, but it worked in the book's favor and I really loved it. The time that it didn't work in the book's favor, at least for me, that is Red Material by Dolly Alderton. This was a book club pick. I decided to pick this because I've never read anything by Dolly Alderton. I'd only heard nothing but incredible things about this author. This was a book that came out last year. So I said, okay, perfect. Let's start with her newest release and I can read it for book club and we can all talk about it. And like in my mind, it was going to go really, really well. And on the cover, it says, "There is no writer quite like Dolly Alderton" by Lisa Taddeo. It has the Lisa Taddeo stamp of approval. And because I love that author, I thought that I was going to be in good hands. Let me clarify. It is nothing against Dolly Alderton as an author. I enjoyed the writing and I noticed because a majority of the time we're following the perspective of this like 30-year-old man. I cannot stand him. I was so frustrated. I didn't care about what he thought. I didn't care about what he was feeling. I was just so annoyed until we got one chapter or like 1 or 2 chapters from a different POV. Loved those chapters. So I know it's not Dolly Alderton's writing. It's just the main character that we're following that for me was insufferable. And for me, I couldn't look past it. Had this been written from a different perspective, I probably more than likely would have enjoyed it. I'd be sitting here raving about it. But we follow the perspective of a man, and that is something that I just do not have the patience for, apparently. So unfortunately, this just did not work out for me. Okay, let's talk size. Specifically, the longest and the shortest books that I read this year. The longest one easily is Intermezzo by Sally Rooney, another book that I got the arc of, and I freaked out when I got this in the mail. The publisher never emailed me back, and so I just thought that I didn't get picked. I read this during a time when I was traveling a lot, and I got to finish this on the plane. This book was a total of 454 pages. Wait, that was the acknowledgements. Are we counting that? Not counting the notes and the acknowledgements. It is on page page 448. I do tend to shy away from bigger books like this, hence why I have not finished A Little Life. I'm so sorry, but just by looking at that book, I get stressed out. But this is the only book that I had brought on the plane, so I had no other option but to read it. And I just love Sally Rooney. I didn't know the direction that this book was going to go in, so it worked out perfectly and I was able to tackle it. Had I not been in an airplane, I don't know if I would have finished it, or I probably would have done like a tandem read or something. Anyway, this is the longest book that I read. Now the shortest book that I read, also when I went on a trip, this was separate from that trip. This book is Devotion by Patti Smith. The last Patti Smith that I read, I believe, was a year, maybe 2 years ago now, and I had read Just Kids. Hadn't read anything from Patti Smith since. This was when I went on a trip to Mexico City. We were roaming the street and there was one bookstore in all of Mexico City that is full of used books in English. We met the owner when we went. He was so sweet and so kind. I remember when we walked in, I always go directly to my favorite authors to see if they have any of their used books. So naturally, I went to the F section to look for Ferrante, and he asked me, oh, are you looking for anything in particular? And I said, oh, anything by Elena Ferrante. And he also loved that author, so I thought that that was really cool. This is a bookstore. It's called Under the Volcano Books. It was completely stacked to the brim, floor to ceiling, covered in books. I absolutely love finding a bookstore like that. This was hidden in the shelves and I decided to go with this one. It is a really short book. This one is 93 pages and this book focuses on her creative process. Throughout the book, you get many personal images that Patti Smith took. It was really nice for my trip. I just kept it in my bag. We've made so much progress. You can't even see the book stack in the video anymore. But the next question is a book that I haven't stopped thinking about. Another book for my top 10. I tried to pick another one, but honestly, it is this book. This is Thirst for Self by Madeleine Lucas. I think I just can't stop thinking about the writing. The writing in this just completely took my breath away. It is a book that I've tabbed a lot, and I find myself naturally going back to pick this book up and thumb through my tab, read them again and again. This book is just written so beautifully. I think about our main character in this a lot, and I love that so many of these quotes honestly just remind me a lot of Lana Del Rey, one of my favorite artists that I love to listen to. I was gonna say authors. Technically she is an author. She wrote a poetry book, but I digress. I've thought a lot about this book in 2024 and I have no shame in that. Question 14 is a little tricky. It's an unpopular book that I love. I went through every book that I read. I couldn't find any that were necessarily unpopular. So I'm switching the question to a popular book that I didn't love, and that unfortunately is Yours Truly by Abby Jimenez. I read this over the summer. I think I actually have a video on this account where I read this, and yeah, I was just not a fan. I've been trying to find authors like Emily Henry because she only publishes one romance a year. I say only, that's so crazy that she even publishes a book every year, but I've run out of books for her, and whenever I'm in a romancy mood, I would love to pick something else up. People told me that Abby Jimenez was a really similar author as far as like writing style goes and the way that she built her character, so I was like, okay, perfect. Those are the things that I value in a romance. Let me try Abby Jimenez. I read the synopsis of all of her books, and the only one that caught my eye was Yours Truly. Half of the way through the book, I was such a fan. I loved the characters. I loved the dual POV. I love the anxiety representation. As an anxious person myself, I just felt really seen and validated with how the male love interest was thinking and feeling and processing his emotions. I was having such a great time. And then it felt like, okay, the book's wrapping up. But no, I was only 80% of the way in my Kindle. So I felt like it dragged. It had a book trope towards the end that I do not like. Immediately took me out of the story. And then from there, it just ruined the whole reading experience. Unfortunately, it just did not work out for me. Question 15 is my highest and lowest rated books on Goodreads. I do not use Goodreads to track my books. I'm just gonna skip question 15 altogether. I couldn't creatively come up with another way to ask the question. So we're just gonna move on to question 16, which is my favorite, most quotable books that I read. I have 3 different books to pick from. I couldn't pick between the 3, so I'm just gonna give you all 3. I have Finding Me by Viola Davis. This is her memoir. This is absolutely incredible. Listen to the audiobook, get a physical copy. You're going to want to write in this. This is one of the most heavily annotated books that I've ever read. I found myself wanting to highlight and underline in almost every single page. And then the other 2 is Second Place by Rachel Cusk, another book that I really love. And then of course, sorry to talk about it it again, but Thirst for Salt by Madeline Lucan. I'm gonna leave it there, but all three of these books also in my top 10. Also, I have another video going into detail on why I loved them. Definitely my favorite quotable books of the year. Question 17, a book with the most unique concept. I immediately knew which one, and it is If an Egyptian Cannot Speak English. Talking about how unique the concept really is ruins the overall surprise. So I'm just going to say, stylistically, I've never read a book like this. The structure of the story, I've never read. Section 1 has questions, section 2 has something else, section 3 turns the book up on its head and just left me in shock because I wasn't really sure what I read in like some of the best ways possible. So definitely it would have to go to this book. Question 18, a book you read that you would reread. I have only 2 for this. I'm just gonna keep it at 2 for this question. One of them, of course, is Talking at Night by Claire Daverly. This is another romance. It wasn't a happy-go-lucky romance, but it was a very beautiful romance that had a lot of yearning and tenderness and care, beautiful writing, pulled at my heartstrings. This emotionally left me in a puddle when I finished it. I just loved this so much. I know that I'm going to want to reread this year now, and I'm so excited to get back into this book and be able to experience it again. And the other book is actually Madonna in a Fur Coat. I read this book during a time in my life when I was so overwhelmed. I had a health scare. I read this book while I was traveling for this health scare, and even though the writing was beautiful, I felt like a lot of it wasn't registering with me at the time just because I had so much going on. And a lot of the books that I read actually that month, I really don't remember too much about. I think that's a disservice to this book because so many mutuals loved it. This was another pick for my book club. A lot of members for my book club loved it, and I feel like I need to do the book a reread in order to do it justice. I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that I listened to this as an audiobook because I was traveling so much during this time when I read it. I would want to get a physical copy of this book and actually take my time to reread it. That is a goal for this new year, so I would definitely have to say those 2 books. We have made it to the end of the video, and now we can talk about reflecting on 2024, talking about 2025. In 2024, my original book goal was 60 books. In 2023, I read 100 books. The reason why I dropped it is just because I felt like I wasn't engaging as much with my books in 2023. Sometimes I'm the type that will fixate on something, and I think seeing that number made me feel this subtle pressure of wanting to continue to just book after book after book after book. Okay, I'll just grab that audiobook, even if it was in a genre that I don't typically care for, just to be able to add it for my total of books that I was reading that year. And I just didn't like how that felt at the end of the year, so I wanted to be mindful in 2024 and say, okay, I'm gonna cut it, and I'm only going to focus on 60 books. So that was my reading goal. I did end up reaching that goal and passing it. I read a total of 70 books in 2024, and I think looking at 2025, I think I also wanna cut it down just a bit more to maybe 50 books, really go from there. I did notice that in 2024, I wasn't really focused too much on my reading goal. I wasn't fixated on that number of 60. It took a lot of that pressure off, and I didn't feel the need to quickly pick up another book as soon as I finished one. So I did like that. The final question in this tag is just talking about 2025 as a whole, reflecting on the kind of things that you would want to do as a reader for the new year. So following similar lines of what I was just saying, in 2025, I want to sit with a book longer. And what I mean by that is I don't want to feel this pressure or this need that as soon as I finish a book, I need to, okay, go back to my bookshelf and be like, okay, what am I reading next? And then start reading that new book. I want to sit with the book that I just finished a bit longer. Like one of them that immediately comes to mind is 3 Women by Lisa Taddeo. I read this, I finished it, loved it, but it's a book that's so layered. It talks about so much that it made me feel like I want to go back and read a specific chapter. I want to journal about a specific topic that was brought up, or a question that the author asks, or a question that the character asks, and process it a bit longer before I decide, okay, I'm done with this one, now I'm going to move on to the next one. So I think that by cutting down my reading goal a bit more and by being more mindful and intentional with that in 2025, it's really going to help. Also going back to being really intentional intentional and mindful with my time is taking the time to read more physical books. I feel like this past year, my life was just very like go, go, go. And I planned my days out back to back to back to back to back. To fit in reading during all of that, I typically will lean a lot more towards audiobooks. So I listen to an audiobook when I'm washing dishes, when I'm driving somewhere, when I'm walking my dog, when I'm folding laundry, when I'm cleaning my room, activities like that. Which, not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily, but I usually always carve out my reading time to read with like a physical book right before bed. The amount of times I actually genuinely read a good amount of a book before bed, maybe less than 5 times, because my body's just so tired. And I'm the type of person that if I lay my head on a pillow, not even a pillow, if I lay down on the couch, I'm going to sleep and I will fall asleep like this. So because of that, I want to be more mindful of carving out time earlier in the day to read my physical book. And then the final 2 that I have is, 1, using my Kindle more. I find that I don't use it all too much. I don't take the time to go through Kindle Unlimited. I don't take the time to even like filter through that as I'm building my TBR. I always just look at what I have physically and I use those books to build my TBR. But Kindle Unlimited has its hits and misses, but they have been coming out better books. Also using Libby, because Libby has this feature that I can now, well, they've had this feature, but you can pick out certain books and instead of reading it on your app on your phone, you can transfer that book to your Kindle. I just haven't made the time to look through the Libby catalog, find the books that I want, and then go on hold if I need to, or just those little things that I need to do to be more mindful of it. So definitely something that I want to focus on in 2025 is using my Kindle more. And the final thing is ordering used books. So last year I had to move, and where I live now, I don't have as many independent bookstores. I have one chain Barnes & Noble, and that's it. There aren't any bookstores relatively close to me. So I find that I'm buying new copies a lot more than I used to. Before I moved, I was surrounded by used bookstores, and I do prefer to get a used book a lot of times. So I want to start ordering my used books online. I know that there's a bunch of websites out there. I just haven't like notated them. So I need to find them, but I know that they're out there. And then I guess the last one is just continuing what I did this past year, which is just being mindful of the authors, the publications that you support, making sure that morally we align, because there really are so many incredible books out there that don't always get the same campaign or the same publication press as some other authors do. So just continuing to be mindful of that and supporting those authors when you can. When you find a hidden gem like that, always taking the time to share it, or just being mindful of who you follow online. I have found so many incredible book recs just from the people that I follow that otherwise I would have never even heard about the author or that publication or that book. So just continuing to do that in 2025. And I think those are all the goals that I have. Those were all of the questions, and those were all of the books that I wanted to discuss with you for today's video. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.